Good afternoon, art students. This is Mr. V. Today we're going to look into portraiture, drawing the eye. Now, the eye is the window to the soul. It's the part that actually will connect with your viewer in a portrait. If you can't capture the eyes, the whole piece will implode on itself. So, of all facial features, this is the one that you need to focus on most intensely. The eyes sell the piece. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take a look at how the eye is made, what parts make up the eye, and why you focus on those specific parts as you draw it, and what they do for the piece as well. We'll also look at some non-examples of what not to do for the piece. This is a picture of an eye. It's just a quick digital painting I did. This is just I'm going to show you guys how to break this down step by step and break it down not only in steps but into pieces as well so that you can recreate any other eye. Now we're not going to get into male and female eyes. We're not going to get into racially different eyes. That's going to be for a different screencast. But to suffice it to say, this is generally a template for you guys to build off of as you work. To draw the eye, as well as any other form of still life, you need to understand how it's made, what specific parts make it up. And the parts of the eye that you need to focus on are as follows. You need to know what the socket is and where it goes. That would be the part of the eye that makes it look kind of sunken. It's the shaded part that makes the rest of the eye stand out. It's also the part that helps you draw where the nose connects to the rest of your face. All right, the next part, the top and the bottom eyelids. Of those two, the most important is the top eyelid. It's the top eyelid and the iris that you focus on the most as you draw your eye. The rest of it, it's all garnish that you add on top of the eye when you're finished. And of the top and the bottom lids, the top one is the darkest. The iris is next. It's the second most important piece of the eye. It's the colored part. If you have green, blue, brown, and black eyes, that's the part of your eye. It's the colored part. It's the part that has those little bike spoke lines that go zigzag in and out too. Next is the pupil. That's the part of the eye that opens up, and it's the darkest part of the eye too. The inner eye and the outer eye. What's that mean? Well, this would be what's called the inner eye. It's the part where the tear duct is at. This would be called the outer eye. It's the part that starts to rise up. And it's also the part where it gets a little dark where both eyelids meet. Some other basic info about drawing the eye. For starters, the eye is never, ever a football. Never. It's never really an oval either. That's how art teachers in elementary and junior high teach the concept, so that when you get to high school and build on it, you can actually draw realistic eyes after that. So if you've had that foundation, now's the time to unlearn that. Football eyes don't exist in nature. They also ignore basic anatomy, and they make the eye look dead and weird. Now the second part, the iris, the piece that's got the color to it, that part in a relaxed pose is almost always sliced off at the top. And if you look over here at this eye in the middle, we don't see the top of the iris. It's a circle just like anything else, but the top of the eyelid slices into it. The iris rests gently on the lower eyelid, almost as if it were sitting on a table. So we always see the bottom of the iris, and we see most of the iris, but the top is usually chopped off by the top eyelid. When you draw, the most attention that you give to the eye is at the top eyelid and the iris. As long as you land those, then your eye will start to take form and look accurate. You can draw just about any eye just focusing on those parts. Now you don't stay there. You need to draw the rest of it in order to make it look realistic. But to capture a person's eye, usually the top eyelid and the iris are the parts that make it look real. The purpose of the inner eye and the outer eye is twofold. One, for the inner eye, if you don't have a tear duct there, it's going to look kind of weird. And two, the inner and the outer eye make the eye look 3D. Those parts are usually shaded or given a little bit of a texture so that it makes the eye look realistic. The eye is basically a big old golf ball with some skin stretched around it, not directly on top flat, but around it. The eyes are round, and by shading the inner and outer eye, it makes it look realistic. Now the outer eye, once again, is still a little dark area, but it also represents this part on the eye here. It's where the bottom of the eye starts to slant upward, and that's one of the ways that you can get your racial and gender variations of the eye, by focusing on this small little part of it. The socket has two reasons. One, it's for 3D effect. It shades and helps punch the rest of the eye out of the face. That sounds painful. And also, it helps you connect the bridge of the nose to the rest of your face. And finally, a little extra piece, a highlight in the iris or near the pupil or on the pupil is what gives an eye life. Now, on this one, I kind of went crazy with the highlights. But if you were to do your iris and your pupil and just leave this tiny little white spot on the pupil, it would make it look alive. If you don't have a highlight on your eye, a pure white spot, not touched by any value, then the eye will look dead, flat, and uninteresting, and kind of creepy. All right, let's look at some examples. I'm going to show you guys a step-by-step on how to do this. Now, this is not only how I did this eye painting, but it's generally a healthy way to start drawing the eye, period. When you draw, start with the top eyelid and then trim the iris off. I usually just go for a little arc, not a rainbow, not a half circle, but just a gentle little curve. And then I attach the iris to the bottom. Now, studying other people, you'll see that different races and different ages and different genders, that top curve is going to change. Some people, the older they get, it's not a curve. It's actually a downward slant because the parts of this part of the face starts to slacken and put a little weight down there. So it'll totally change up. All right, the next part is we don't want to leave the eye just a curve. That's kind of football eye-like, and we want to stay the heck away from that. What you need to do is trim the inner eye in. And let's look at the example over here up in the corner. Look how it's not a gentle curve. It started as one, but eyes typically taper off and go downward a little bit once they get towards the socket and the tear duct. So we trim that in. That can be a straight line, it can be a curved line, whatever you want, as long as it looks natural. All right, the third step is draw the bottom of the eye. Now you notice that's not necessarily a flat, a perfect curve. It's kind of flatter on one side than the other. The outside part of your eye, that curves upward more, okay? So eyes are totally not footballs. They're asymmetrical. That means they're not even on both sides if we were to draw a line down the middle. Next, if you were to do a contour line drawing just like this, you could draw the socket. And the socket is how you get the other part of your top eyelid. You would just draw a little line here and then connect it up and over your eye. That's how you get your eyelid visible. Okay, the next step, what I did is I shaded the inner and the outer eye to give it kind of a 3D effect. And finally, you throw additional details, finishing touches. If this were just a contour line drawing, that would be the eyelashes. That would be maybe a little additional socket area for the nasal bone and the bridge of the nose meeting the brow. That would be eyebrows, and so on. So any other additional details, that's where it goes. So how do you do the iris? Well, there's several different ways to do the iris. You can do it with simply just value. You could do it with bike spoke lines. If you look over here at the example, it's both. What I did is I shaded my values in first, and then I hit it with texture afterward. How did I do those textures? Well, just like a bicycle, how all the spokes go in towards the center, the pupil is the middle of the bicycle wheel. And you simply just hatch in a radial pattern. That's what we call it, like bike spokes in a radial pattern. You hatch in circles. Some lines are thick, some are thin, some are long, some are short. You stagger them and make them look interesting that way. You also shade the top of the iris. It's darker at the top of the iris than it is at the bottom. That's just the nature of how light falls on the eye. There's an eyelid covering up everything up top, so you want to have some physics going on in there to make it look real. So let's look at non-examples. These two eyes right here are exactly the same. The only difference is that one of them was painted using kind of artsy, higher level, skill level techniques, but they both stink. They both are inaccurate. I wouldn't even really call them eyes. You can see they're football eyes. Football eyes don't exist in nature. They ignore basic anatomy, and because of that, your viewer won't really understand what's going on in your piece. They'll kind of scratch their head and think, oh man, that looks unnatural. You can have the best shading in the world, but if you have football eyes, it's really going to look awkward. So by paying attention to these parts of the eye, your piece will look great. The other reason I did this is because it goes to show you, no matter what your skill level is, if you choose not to use the techniques, it's still going to stink. Because think of like a sports car. Let's say you buy a Lamborghini and you go out to drive it and it sputters and it grinds and it just really doesn't want to drive and it's really poorly made. It's kind of like that. If your composition isn't very strong, if your knowledge of anatomy is weak and you ignore those techniques, you could have the prettiest looking drawing, but under the hood it would be completely falling apart, and that's obvious through the piece. Another thing with football eyes, how can you tell which eye is which is the left or the right? You can't. Where are the eyelids at? There are none. Does it look 3D? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, it looks flat, like a sticker. How could this eye blink? Where are the tear ducts at? And so on. So, if you're going to do a portrait, stick with these easy steps on how to draw this and be mindful of all those different parts of the eye so that you can draw it realistically. And ultimately, if your eyes are looking like this, that tells me one of two things. One, you just review the material and ask me, and I'll go through it with you. And two, maybe you just want to fly through the assignment and not focus on craftsmanship and quality, in which case, best of luck to you. But since the eyes are the most important piece of a portrait, your portrait will ultimately suffer if the eyes aren't given the proper attention. So hopefully this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Rewind it if there aren't any parts that are sticking very well. Yeah, I'm the same way. I got to watch things more than once in order to get it to stick. So use the frayer as you're working on your eyes. Keep all your supplies out, rock and roll, and have fun. All right, I look forward to seeing you. Take care.